Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of American Government with Mr. Jones. Today's topic is going to take a look at political parties. Now this is the first lesson in a longer unit that talks about political parties in our country. Today we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to define political party. In other words, we're going to talk about what it is. Second, we'll talk about its origins and the development in the United States. That means we'll talk about where they came from and how they've changed during our history. And then finally, we're going to look at third parties. These are smaller parties that kind of fall outside the mainstream of the two big ones. If we're looking at the California standards, we're actually talking about California Standard 12.6.1. This asks us to do the origin, the development, and the role of political parties. Now, you'll notice in the table of contents there, I didn't mention the role. That's because you're actually going to do that on your own during the independent practice. So our lesson is going to talk more about the origin and the development. Our first topic, defining political parties. Basically, a political party is a group of people who've decided to join together because they have common interests or common beliefs about government or government topics. I know it sounds confusing because you see the word political party and you think it's probably a celebration, but it's not. It's kind of like when you go into a restaurant and you say, I'd like a table for 3. And when they call you, they'll usually say something along the lines of Jones Party of 3. In other words, they're saying Jones Group of 3. And that's what a political party is. It's a political group of people who have common interests. The real reason they organize is because they want to win elections. And by winning elections, they can then control government policy or do what their people want them to do. And you guys will actually look more at number 2 on your own today. Can you give me an example? Yeah, I guess. Let me give you a couple here. How about Party A? Party A is a group of people who want higher taxes on wealthy Americans. They're also pro-choice, meaning they think women have a right to choose what happens with their bodies. This usually is in the conversation of abortion. Number 3, they want more protection for the environment, which means more regulation on businesses, that kind of thing. And finally, they want more gun control laws. In other words, they want to make it harder for people to get one, or maybe make guns safer. Party B, on the other hand, wants lower taxes for all taxpayers. They are usually anti-abortion, or at least some stage of abortion. They want less environmental regulation. This means that basically they think businesses need freedom to avoid some of the environmental protections, or that they go too far. And finally, they want less gun control laws. They think that people are intelligent enough to know how to deal with their own guns. And if you want to fast forward to see what these parties really are, Party A is what we would consider the Democratic Party today. That doesn't mean all people in there believe it. It's just a general idea of their platform. And Party B would be the modern Republican Party. So this is what I mean by common interests. They share different ideas and how they think the government should be. Topic 2. In Topic 2, we're going to talk about the origin and the growth of political parties in the United States. In other words, where do they come from and how do they change? The first thing we should talk about is George Washington, our nation's first president. He is actually the only president who hasn't been a part of a political party during his time in office. And the reason why is George Washington didn't actually think political parties were a good idea. The reason why is because he felt people would be more beholden to the political party rather than to what the people want. And the exact quote that they had from him is that there was a baneful effects of the spirit of the party, or the very harmful effects. The idea that political parties would be out for themselves rather than doing what's right. You would get the us versus them mentality of politics. And he actually didn't favor that because he felt that they would then be less responsive to what the people wanted. But before his political term ends, there's actually 2 parties that form. The first is the Federalist Party. They believe in a strong central government. What this means is they felt that Washington, D.C., or the federal government itself, should be the strongest power in our nation. They should be able to control more of what happens in each individual state. and they would dictate it from the federal capital. Some figures who actually were part of this federal party, or Federalist Party, Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. And actually John Adams went on to be president. The other political party were the Democratic Republicans. Now they viewed the exact opposite of what the Federalists thought. Democratic Republicans felt states should have more power than the feds. Yes, we are a collection of individual states, and we all are part of a country, but states know states best, and they should make those decisions for themselves. And so they argued that the state should have the power, or should at least be the focus and the supremacy of power, and it should rely within the states. Some important political figures for them were, of course, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. But those parties don't last forever. In fact, the Federalists kind of die off fairly quickly. And we're left with almost a single party, and that is the Democratic Republican Party. And they actually form all the way until like the 1950s when they start to break apart. But it was very clear even in the 1820s that this party was starting to divide. On one side you had the Democrats, and on the other side you had the Whigs. Let's take a look at this again. In the election of 1824, you had one party, but within that party you had two factions, or two groups who were starting to grow. And the first, as you just saw, were the Whigs. And they supported a candidate for president named John Quincy Adams. Now, usually a political party in our time would elect one person, but this party actually had two different people that they wanted. The other group, the Democrats, wanted Andrew Jackson. And so it was very clear during the election of 1824 that this was a divided political party, and that it wasn't going to last a whole lot longer. In fact, it wouldn't last a whole lot longer. The reason it wouldn't last much longer is one very simple issue: slavery. In the 1850s, our nation started to expand west. We were looking at adding new territories, and we kind of had to face the question of, as we expand, do we allow slavery to exist? Well, at this point, there's only one major political party, and it's the Democratic Republican. A large group of them decided that they no longer wanted to be part of this party. And the reason why is they felt new territories, like Kansas and Nebraska, should not be allowed to vote on slavery. It should simply be illegal in those new territories. The rest of the group in the Democratic Republican Party didn't really want to deal with the issue. It's not that they were so much in favor of slavery, it's that they didn't want to deal with the issue, period. Now, those people who broke away ended up joining with a group called the Free Soil Party and with a faction called the Northern Whigs. They ended up deciding to create their own political party, and they gave it the title of the Republican Party. So this forms as basically an anti-slavery party. The other group decided to change their name, and they took on the single name of the Democratic Party. Now, this might sound very familiar to you guys, because since the 1850s, these are the two main political parties that we still have today. These run all the way from the 1800s to your time that you're living. Now we're going to talk about third parties. A third party is a smaller political group that exists within a nation. And what I mean by smaller, well, they're not as big as the first two. And obvious by the name third party, you know there has to be two other ones. And the reason we call them this is because we have two main political parties in our nation who pretty much control everything. It's what I was talking about a second ago, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And they pretty much call the shot when it comes to government decisions. And so by calling these third parties or smaller parties, we're kind of saying that they're not, I don't want to say not as important, but they definitely don't have the power that the other two have. That doesn't mean that they don't play an important role in our government, and in fact you'll look at that later. But they have had some fairly significant impacts when it comes to presidential elections. Can you give me some examples? Sure. Let's go ahead and take a look back at some of the major ones in our history. The first is the Free Soil Party. That's kind of what we were talking about a second ago with the entire breakup of the Democratic Republican Party. They form as an anti-slavery group who wants freedom for all people in newfound territories. Second was the Bull Moose Party. Now, this was actually founded by Teddy Roosevelt. And the reason he decided to go out and create a third party is because he was unhappy with the two political parties running in the election. So he went, formed a third party, and ran for president. And he doesn't win, but at least he makes it known that third parties can exist. Moving to more modern day issues, we have the Green Party. Now, they're not for the color green. They're actually in favor of the environment. And so almost everything they focus on, all of the issues, relate to environmental protections. And they've played a fairly significant role in our political history, as they have determined some elections in the past decade or so. Another one we have today that's fairly significant is the Libertarian Party. Their focus is all about individual rights and making sure that the government isn't involved in their individual issues. Now, I have to give you my favorite of all time. And this isn't a big third party by any means. In fact, I think it's a party of one. But it's a man named Jimmy McMillan. He ran for governor of New York a few years ago, and the name of his party is the Rent is Too Damn High Party. In fact, I'll show you a video clip later, but the only issue he cared about, no matter what they asked him, was the rent is too damn high in New York. So wait till you see the clip and you'll appreciate why I really like Jimmy McMillan. But that's third party. They're smaller groups who focus on usually individual topics, and they do have some power in our country. Well, that kind of concludes our lesson for today, but before we go, I want to give you a brief recap of what we've talked about. So we started by defining political party. I told you that it is a group of people who join together because they have common beliefs. They don't believe everything the exact same, but for the most part they share a group of broad interests. And the reason they form is basically to win elections. And you'll look at some other reasons on your own. We also looked at the origins of political party and how they changed throughout our history, at least in this country. We started with the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and we end with the Democrats and the Republicans. And finally, we looked at third parties. These are smaller groups or less popular parties, I can say, I guess, that exist in a two-party system. So while they're small, they do play some important parts in our politics. Now you get to do some research. I have a handout that you're going to use to look at the role of political parties in our country. In other words, you're going to look at why do we have them, and when they are in power, what do they actually do in our government? So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I wish you the best of luck on in the independent practice. And for now, goodbye.